Game over. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger potion.
So serious. Roll out.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Oh, welcome to this podcast review for October 21st, 2024, and I'm JD Durang.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, as we paint our rooms red for this conversation. Or maybe
I'm
we
not
shouldn't,
doing that. I'm not doing
because apparently that is quite dangerous, as we are on the internet. We're not on the dark web, but we are on the internet.
that. Don't
Maybe
even
we
say
don't
those
want
words
to
if
be-
we're posting anything on the internet.
Yeah, I might have to bleep that out. Yeah. Yeah. We are here to talk about the French Canadian Red Rooms. And I don't know about you, Brendan, but this is a film that was not on my radar until about a month ago, when I believe
Same.
it was getting the rounds in New York and LA. And people were very high on this film. It was released to critical acclaim.
Yep.
And while broadly speaking, it was getting some great reviews, it was those close to us that I quite revere as film critics that were really high on this. So it
Yeah.
immediately got my attention and have marked this film as one to see. It has now made its way to the on-demand sphere.
The
And-
on-demand sphere. I love that.
Yeah. Where we were able to finally catch up with this film. And
Yeah.
it wasn't necessarily on our radar to get into this week, as Smile 2, of course, was one of the wide releases. But Brendan and I are not able to get into that film primarily because I still haven't seen the first film. I have been
it's pretty
lacking
good.
in my homework.
It's pretty good. That first film, I think, it's not perfect. I think it's pretty good, though. But I'm still really curious
Okay.
about Smile 2. And at some point, we may get to that one, maybe in a catch-up episode, or maybe we actually review it somewhere down the line if we think there's something worth talking about there. But I'm glad that we're sticking to something that's at least horror adjacent in a way. Really, the thing that solidified my interest in Red Rooms, there was a recent podcast episode on The Big Picture by The Ringer with Sean Fennessy and Chris Ryan specifically, where they talked about their 5 favorite horror films of 2024 thus far. And I think it proves that the year has been pretty interesting for horror. So I'm glad we're
Yeah.
at least keeping to the horror theme in some way by talking about Red Rooms. And I think it was Sean that had Red Rooms somewhere in his 5. So it piqued my interest further, knowing that it was not just getting the rounds and some of our own critic friends liked it, but it's also popping up on lists like that. So it is becoming a pretty celebrated film from the year. And I like that we're at least keeping to the horror theme in some way. So I feel like in
exactly.
that sense, it was a really nice pick.
Absolutely. It worked out really well where we could keep to the horror theme, as we noted at the end of our review of Woman of the Hour. This film is a great double feature with Woman of the Hour,
Yeah.
and maintaining the serial killer theme and its feminist ideas as well. There is so much to like about both of these films in that specific regard. So it worked out extremely well, even though we couldn't get to Smile 2. As Brendan noted, maybe we'll get to that down the line in some sort of catch-up episode. I still need to get to the first film. I will try to
It's on
get to
Hulu.
that
Yeah.
as
So
I
you
can.
can. Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
probably see Smile 2 this week because I'm genuinely curious about that one. I don't know. Maybe I'm in the right mood for it, which means I'll probably like it more now if I see it this week than any other week. So I probably have to see it
Sure,
this week.
sure.
But yeah, I'm looking forward to that one. But I'm more looking forward to this conversation we're about to have here.
Yeah, and this is where timing could maybe get the best of me, because I wasn't able to get to Smile 2. I did have other things on my radar I needed to see, and we had prioritized another film in lieu of Smile 2. That didn't work out scheduling wise for Brendan or I, honestly.
Yeah.
But I had seen Red Rooms. I very much recommended it to Brendan. And for all the reasons he noted, it just worked out really well. So here
It
we
did.
are.
Yep.
pairing Woman of the Hour with Red Rooms this week as far as reviews go. But I will get to Andrew Garfield and Florence Pugh. I want to see that as well. I want to
see the
I've
carousel
heard
horse.
really great things about exactly. I got to see the horse. And I've heard really great things about Smile 2 as well. So it is something I do need to catch up with. Time is a flat circle. It just escapes me with my 2 kids and everything going on. I just celebrated 2 birthdays in the house.
You did, yeah.
So it's been nuts.
Your wife and your son.
Thank you.
I sometimes forget how close their birthdays are. Are they a day apart?
They're a day apart. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're a day apart. Yeah. They were back to back.
Yeah.
If Sam came about 8 hours later, they would have shared a birthday.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was pretty
a
incredible.
little serendipitous for sure. But I think given the conversation we're about to have here on Red Rooms, you might be thanking them for giving you such a busy schedule that you couldn't make it to the theater.
Yeah, couldn't make it to the theater. So instead, I got to see Pascal Plante's Red Room. So let's go ahead and jump into this French-Canadian psychological horror thriller that is written and directed by Pascal Plante. It stars Juliette Garipi, Laurie Bobbin, Maxwell McCabe Locos, and a few others that come and go. I guess we can know Elizabeth Locus, who is the mother of one of the victims, and she does show up a few times throughout the film. If you're not familiar with Red Rooms, it is about a model who becomes obsessed with a high-profile murder trial. Boy, does that sound familiar. Maybe we'll get into that. Okay, Brendan, what did you think about Red Rooms?
Man, I was kind of shaken by this one. So I don't even know where to start with this. I'll just simply say this I'll just say this might be the best movie of the year. That's what I'm gonna say about it. It's a movie that slowly reveals itself by not really revealing itself at all, which I found really fascinating. I think it is a great pairing with Women of the Hour, like we were alluding to there, like our great guest Megan Kearns alluded to at the end of that review. It really does make for a nice double feature of sorts, and I'm glad that we're releasing Women of the Hour first, because I feel like that's a movie that depicts a true crime itself, whereas Red Rooms then gets into this notion of the bystander's obsession with true crime. I think that Pascal Plante was very much fascinated by the idea of, what are they called, like serial killer groupies, I think he referred to them as. It's a really creepy notion of the sort of psychopathic tendencies that exist beyond the crimes themselves, or like the killings themselves. This is a movie that starts off as really just a thrilling courtroom drama in many ways. The subject matter certainly ripe with horror, certainly fits the horror genre quite well, but then goes in places that make this one of the most frightening experiences of the year. It's certainly not the most literal horror film of the year, but it might be among, if not the scariest movie of the year, just given where it does go. And we'll talk about what that means. All I'll say is, JD, are you familiar with a podcast called Crime Junkie at all? It's a pretty well-known podcast. It's hosted by Ashley Flowers and her friend Britt, where Ashley just simply talks about real life crimes, but she talks about it in a way that almost feels like a narrative, like a story, and you have this ominous music in the background, so it almost feels like you're hearing a frightening tale of sorts. It's a weirdly addicting podcast. But these are real crimes that it's depicting on the show. This movie, Red Rooms, made me never want to listen to that podcast ever again. Because it made me feel like this sense of fear that I never want to accidentally become one of these serial killer groupies. Like, I never want to participate in this, and I never want to get that urge. And the way that this film depicts that idea is chilling. This is a chilling movie, and I loved it.
Yeah, this film absolutely rolls. It is hands down one of the best movies of the year so far. It is one of the most disturbing yet thought-provoking and bold serial killer films we've seen in quite some time. gore and violence is oftentimes horrific, and clearly there is a large audience that craves it. But there's something about the sadistic torture and brutality at the core of this film that is then used as a cipher for Kellyanne's obsessive behavior that I find immensely more unsettling. We never see any graphic violence here. The film isn't interested in surface tension and cheap thrill. It's what we learn about three young girls who died in the most horrific way possible. And on a few occasions, we hear their screams when evidence is being played as part of the trial, which is deranged on its own terms. But the real horror of the film, as you wonderfully talked about there, Brennan, it lies in its ideas of apathy and groupie-esque defense of the perpetrator, which I'm sure we'll talk about more as we get into. But how this film goes about examining that here, it is incredibly riveting. I also love the approach to the cinematography and sound design in this film. The framing and composition is really inspired. The photography is drenched in a digital imagery that will remind you a lot of Fincher, but the camera is much more frenetic in this film. Maybe ostentatious in places, but I love its ambition. There is a purpose to the way it moves, and I found it really engaging. The use of color, especially red, as one would assume, is engrossing.
Oh, I thought it was pink.
Pink and orange because of Halloween, you know.
I don't know. Pink rooms doesn't sound nearly as intimidating.
But yeah, I love the use of color. I don't think it's overused. It's utilized in the right moments and in the right ways.
Yeah,
the sound design is incredibly captivating. It's such a key component to invoking the film's emotional terror. And I think it's really well paced. It's methodical and patient. It is very much the definition of a slow burn. It's not about the investigation of these murders. Most of that is already deciphered before the events of this film. It's not really about the courtroom drama either, outside of that opening sequence, as Brennan denoted a moment ago in his opening thoughts. It is primarily devoted to deconstructing Kellyanne's apathy and Clementine's murky defense of Ludovic. Some may find that banal, but I was totally, wholly, unnervingly gripped by this film and the way it goes about doing that. It is unlike anything this genre has seen before. For as much that is familiar with this film on the surface, there is so much to this film that is refreshing and it just feels really new. I couldn't believe how this film gets to have its cake and eat it too.
It has it both ways, because for those looking into this movie, and if they have a curiosity for it, but maybe they're hoping for a more conventional crime mystery, a conventional courtroom drama of sorts, there is still a what if factor to it that could keep maybe a standard audience member engaged. Like there is still a few twists and turns in the narrative that reveal a few things here and there that I think can keep people engaged if they're looking for something a bit more, let's just say, standard. But for those of us, there's another layer here that reveals a completely different movie than the one that is initially set up here. There's a nice little bait and switch of sorts. The opening, like maybe 15 or 20 minutes, almost feels like a real-time static shot of this courtroom starting. It's trying to recreate what feels like a genuine court experience, even right down to someone randomly coughing in the background. Like it almost feels like video footage of a real trial in a way, which is why even though the camera lingers and moves in perhaps a look at me kind of way, like it is very much calling attention to its craft.
It is not still. The film, the camera moves quite a lot.
It does. There are a lot of one takes in this movie, but it's the kind of one takes I like, where maybe 5 or 6 minutes go by, you realize, oh, it didn't cut yet. So like I don't think it calls attention to itself too much. Like it actually feels immersive, as if you're really participating in this trial as an audience member in many ways, which I think sets the tone perfectly for what this movie ends up being actually about, which is this obsessive mentality that some individuals have for real life crime and how they almost feed off of that. In a way, this almost becomes like the strangest vampire movie I've ever seen, just in its own thematic way, and that's what makes our lead performance here from Garipe, who plays Kellyanne, one of the creepiest things I've seen all year. Like, you can almost say perhaps this is the the best villain of the year in a lot of ways. But there's more going on. It's a really interesting movie, the way it just flips the script and gives you a completely different experience than it sets itself up as,
Yeah.
while not fully alienating that same thing. So it is having its cake and eating it too, like you said. I think that's really well
Yeah.
put.
Yeah, there is a magic trick at the nucleus of this film that I was chilled by, unnerved by, but found cinematically so captivating. And as we noted earlier, as you would assume, given that this is based off of the trial of a serial killer,
Mm-hmm.
the film certainly is invoking obsessiveness, the
Yeah.
compulsion that many have to solve true crime. That has become a striking reality in the modern age, to the point that police departments will literally rely on the public at times to help them gather information. There have been real world cold cases solved because normal civilians took it upon themselves to dig further into them. So there's nothing new to this film in that regard, but it does two things that I find profoundly brilliant. One, the film is much more interested in the polarity between one's fantastical desires to be involved and the consequences of anonymity in terms of Kellyanne's obsessions and the lengths she goes to in order to help solve the crime, so to speak. That messaging is blunt. It's still quite disturbing. The way it's depicted in the film, the way she becomes a part of the dark web, the overt joy and enthusiasm she displays near the end of this film when she, I'll say vaguely, wins something. It is very startling. But where the film thrives, I think, is how her compulsiveness intersects with anonymity, because we don't really learn much about Kellyanne. There's a remarkable ambiguity to her motivations, and I don't think that's an oversight. It's a deliberate choice to mirror the character's surreptitious ambitions, which invokes some fascinating questions as to why she makes the choices she does. We know what she is obsessing over, but why? She already has a level of fame and notoriety, so it isn't that as a model, which we alluded to in the synopsis. It certainly isn't for money either. Is it for justice? I don't think so. Her actions don't seem to indicate that. Whatever the reason, because of the dark path she goes down, she simply has to stay anonymous in the end. And I find the polarity between her isolation and obsession so fascinating in this film, which again is why her vagueness really works here. Most films cannot get away with that, where your central character, the one you follow throughout the film, is very thinly veiled. But that is Kellyanne. There's a mysterious vagueness to her in this film. Yet that is very much that is very purposeful here. And I think the film gets to have its cake and eat it too.
Well, yeah, you can infer a lot of things as to why Kellyanne chooses to get involved in the really grotesque ways that she does. But I think it still all comes down to this idea that if you want to find a high level / surface level view of it, it is this almost addictive quality that she has for this type of material and for this type of participation. I'm with you. I didn't sense any desire for justice from her end. I simply saw it as, and again, you could see it as many things, but my first go around, I was really latching on to like her gross interest in wanting to partake in this investigation in some way, even if that means not revealing that you ever did. Like the fact that she does remain anonymous means that she's not seeking justice. She doesn't care if she's the one that actually is known to bring about maybe new evidence or shed some new light on any type of matter. She's not looking for any heroic gestures here. And that's weirdly the creepiest thing about this, is knowing that after this is all said and done, is she going to do this again for some other serial killer in a couple years or even a couple months, maybe? There's the grotesque nature in how many people obsess over true crime itself, to the point that we've become kind of desensitized to the realities of it. I think it is the creepiest thing this movie is getting at. And I love that the film doesn't reveal those motivations, because it makes those obsessive qualities less effective then. I love movies that portray things like addiction, but don't use traditional vices to portray addiction. This is kind of another one of those examples. That addictive quality is truly frightening.
Yeah, I absolutely love the mysterious qualities around Kellyanne, the ambiguity of why she makes the choices in the end that she does. This film offers absolutely no solutions to it. However, there is one moment that I do find really insightful.
Okay.
And it is arguably the scene of the year. It is striking. There's a moment about 2/3 of the way through this film. And for context, because I do think this is important setup here, there is uncertainty around the oldest victim. As we noted, there are 3 young girls at the center of this trial that were brutally murdered. One of them has uncertainty because there are videos for 2 of the victims, right?
Yeah.
But for the oldest victim, Camille, the FBI, the Canadian version of that, I forget the naming of it, but they were not able to find the video of the 3rd victim.
Yeah.
And because there's no video, her death has evoked a lot of curiosity around it. And the film slowly builds tension with Kellyanne's obsessions over Camille, what she was wearing when she died, what may have happened to her. Perhaps some slight spoilers here, but for the sake of the conversation, I feel like we need to get into this.
Okay.
Due to her fanaticism, Kellyanne's fanaticism, her modeling career becomes compromised, and it culminates in a moment where Kellyanne enters the courtroom.
I knew you were going to reference this scene. Yep.
With a new look that eerily mimics Camille. And what unfolds is one of the most disturbing scenes of maybe all time.
It is, the sound editing, the slow movements of it.
And I want to get to that as well.
Yeah.
It is extremely unsettling. The smile from Kellyanne, the wave from Ludovic, it sent shivers up my spine. And while the film never explicitly explains Kellyanne's motivations, this moment may be the most insightful because it's really the only moment where she removes her anonymity. She was quietly present in the trial leading up to this moment. And in other scenes away from the courtroom, there are oblique references to her extreme, quote unquote, extreme interest, alluding to things like BDSM. Up until this moment in the courtroom, the one we're talking about, those things were mutually exclusive. But when she became her most vulnerable, she completely lets go of her restraints and creates this stunt that seems to give her some sort of sexual thrill out of it, which is especially sickening when you consider, as Brendan just noted, the sound design and how Camille's screams are interwoven into the soundtrack. It is one of the most chilling filmmaking tactics I've seen. It is a remarkable moment in that regard. And maybe to your point, Brendan, once she gets off, so to speak, between
Mm-hmm.
this moment in the courtroom and one that comes later with this auction, I'll say vaguely.
Yeah.
Between those two moments, that was arguably enough for her to simply leave the rest of it to justice. I say in
Yeah.
quotations for those not
Yeah.
watching on YouTube.
Yeah. Yeah. As if she still wanted to participate in this,
Yeah.
but didn't feel like it wasn't her goal. But in a way, like that obsessive quality leads to a desire to participate, even despite wanting to remain anonymous. But what makes that scene that you're referencing so chilling, that recreation of Camille, who was the third girl who was killed, as we talked about, there are so many layers happening there simultaneously, because you can look at the almost, again, I use this word when talking about woman of the hour. I guess I'll use it once again. The almost fetishistic like qualities in Kellyanne and how she wants to feed off of that. That's certainly apparent, and that adds that chilliness that you're talking about. But maybe you can also look at it a little bit practically, because it comes off the heels of this fallout that Kellyanne has with a woman named Clementine. They formed a very brief friendship, and Clementine is someone, played by Laurie Babin, who has this almost, to put it very bluntly, she kind of has a crush on this killer. Like she's got like this almost romantic infatuation with him. And then when she sees a few things that she shouldn't have seen, being some of the footage of what happened to the two other girls, you can tell that Clementine begins to have a little bit of doubt in how she was feeling. And perhaps this moment from Kellyanne is a very, fetishistic way of trying to alleviate that doubt even in her. It's almost like she was deliberately trying to provoke some type of reaction from this potential killer, Ludwig, who was being charged for these crimes, as if she needed to prove to herself, oh, I got you. Like, that's the moment I was looking for. So there is a psychological component to it, but also perhaps a practical component happening simultaneously, given the way that the narrative has unfolded up until that point. And I like that the film has all of those things happening simultaneously.
Yeah, it is interesting, the relationship between those two, speaking of Clementine and Kellyanne. And I do think that her relationship with Clementine is perhaps a significant, it's at least a partial response to why she goes into that courtroom the way she does. Because you're right, Clementine more overtly is a cipher for this strange phenomenon that almost functions like a distant Stockholm syndrome, where people might excuse the behavior because of how the perpetrator looks or how the feeling they get from them in some sort of way. It's something that's existed for some time. You think of Ted Bundy, for example.
Yeah.
And the way women responded to him at the time. So it's not a new revelation, but in the modern age with social media, we see it a lot more now. Sometimes in a more playful way. I'm not sure if you're on TikTok or not, Brendan. However, there is this trend on TikTok around women swooning over Death Eaters at Universal in Orlando.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
I've
seen that.
Very
I've
amusing.
Seen that. I've seen that.
It is very, very funny. But Death Eaters in the world of Harry Potter are violent murderers.
They're called Death Eaters.
They're Death Eaters. So women swooning over them because, again, of how they look or some feeling they get from them makes it applicable. Now, that's, of course, playful, fun, fictitious TikTok stuff. On a more serious note, you look at the cases, the real life cases of Cameron Herron and Wade Wilson, for example. There was a headline, a real world headline that said TikTok users are protesting convicted killer's innocence because he's, quote, too cute. That is a real headline. about Cameron Herron. Let me reread that. TikTok
Please
users
don't. That's just
are
gross.
protesting convicted killer's innocence because he's, quote, he's too cute.
Because yeah, you do know that
Unbelievable.
cuteness does equate politeness and niceness, right? That's just a
It's just-
fact. That is just a fact.
Yeah. And for Wade Wilson, it was reported that he received nearly 4,000 messages from women who sent him X-rated photos. Again, because of how he looked or how they got some sort of feeling out. It is absolutely
Ted
wild.
Bundy really did ruin it all, didn't he? Because like I mean, he
Really
was
did.
sort of notorious for being a very good-looking man that just happened to be a
sadistic
horrible
murderer.
killer.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
absolutely.
But like I feel like Ted Bundy was maybe the first to have like dissertations on that idea, right?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
yes,
It was
yeah,
the first time it was widely discussed in some
yeah,
sort of way.
yeah. That's not to say that he was the first ever quote unquote good looking serial killer.
Sure.
Yeah, which is a very subjective thing in and of itself. But
it does invoke a lot of questions, like
it does,
why
yeah.
someone would respond to someone so horrible in that way. It is absolutely wild, but that's what I love about Clementine here. She has no relation to Ludovic, our serial killer in this film. She simply saw, as she notes, a softness in his eyes and felt empathy for him. So, regardless of the evidence, despite the horrific nature of these deaths, of these young girls, the oldest was just 16.
Yeah.
She defiantly defends Ludovic at every opportunity. Again, I find that more unsettling than conventional gore and superficial thrill. Now, to your point, and you noted this earlier in the conversation, the film eventually does deconstruct her misguided empathy.
Yeah.
She does have a breaking point. There is a scene at the end of the second act where her pseudo Stockholm syndrome is undermined by an intimate reality and her empathy shifts perspective.
Yeah.
So, on her own terms, Clementine, I think, is a fascinating character. And given the opening of the film, it is an interesting reversal to your point in your opening thoughts. I love the character here. I think it's wonderfully performed by Laurie Babin, and how the character then goes on to inspire ?
Yeah.
Kelly Ann and that courtroom scene that we mentioned earlier. I think it's part of it. I think Kellyanne has her own motivations as well that, again, are mostly vague and mysterious.
Yeah.
But I do find it insightful because, again, to the duality of her obsessions and being anonymous, that courtroom scene for Kellyanne is the only moment where she removes that anonymity.
Yeah.
And it becomes this stunt that is, I don't know how to describe it other than it's harrowing. It is.
It's frightening. And
daunting
it
to
is.
watch. Yeah.
I was going to call it the turning point of the film, but I feel like that comes even earlier with Clementine's own arc. I feel like Clementine's reversal, her character reversal, is sort of the turning point of the movie in many ways. That courtroom scene that you're talking about just solidifies it even further. And it's why I feel like the film succeeds in two ways. The first being everything we're talking about thematically and sociologically, but also the fact that this still is functioning like a sort of crime mystery. I just think these two moments, Clementine's arc and then this creepy wave that Ludwig gives to Kellyanne in that moment, sort of confirms what the answer to this mystery is. So then it allows us to focus more on Kellyanne's own deterioration in the end. So even though we do get an answer at the end, it's an answer that we pretty much know is going to happen, and the film is very much aware it's not about that. And I like the way it plays both ends of that. So I could see the film being rather appealing to multiple audiences looking for different things out of it. I think it has something to offer in multiple lanes, which is a hard thing for a movie like this to do.
Yeah. Which, again, is why I think the film gets to have its cake and eat it too, because while the case, the courtroom drama of it all, there is a final solution at the end, but
Mhm.
we still don't know why. We
Mhm.
don't know
Mhm.
why
From
Kellyanne
Kellyanne's perspective, yeah, we don't know
Yeah.
why her actions are never revealed to us. But I love trying to infer what they are. I love
Oh,
trying to
for sure.
decipher
I
what it is.
agree. No,
And that's
I completely
the best
agree.
part. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so interesting about the polarity of empathy and apathy in this film. We just talked about Clementine and how that shifts from her, where her empathy moves from one side of the aisle to the other once the violence becomes real for her.
Mhm.
And it's not just this story you hear
Yeah.
in the news, or it's a talking panel on a television show, and that gets you all riled up, as we see at one point in this film. She
Right.
completely changes her perspective at the end of this film.
Yeah.
Kellyanne is completely disassociated from the violence and the humanity of everyone involved, to the point that she makes a complete stunt at that trial, as we just talked about. But in the end, she makes a choice that isn't entirely selfish, and there are major consequences as a result,
Mhm.
but we don't know why. And
But
I
the thing is,
find
like,
that so interesting.
it also is kind of selfish, though, given some of the actions just before she chooses to leave a certain piece of evidence behind. I'll simply say,
Yeah. You're talking
again, we're trying
about the
the selfie.
breaking and entering?
I'm talking about the selfie specifically. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
the
yeah.
breaking and entering is one thing, but the selfie specifically,
Yeah.
it
Next
allows.
to a bed. I'll say vaguely, but
Yeah,
oh my
yeah,
gosh.
yeah.
Yes.
Again, we talk about creepy images, the way that light flashes on the phone in a dark room like
Yeah.
that, and she's got this creepy smile.
Yeah.
Just in
And
the
this is after the courtroom stunt. This
yeah.
is after the courtroom stunt. This is after an auction that takes place that is quite foreboding on its own.
Mhm.
All of that has already happened. I also think of the visual in terms of unnerving visuals in this film. After the auction, there's a moment. I'll try to keep this as unspoiled as I can.
Mhm.
But there's a moment where we see Kellyanne at her computer. I won't reveal what she's watching or what's happening. I won't give any context away. But she's at
Mhm.
her computer. The color of the film, as we noted earlier, it pops up once again.
Yeah.
And we just get the visual of her putting on her headphones. And she's just so comfortable and anxious and ready
It's like
to
she's listening
watch.
to Enya or something like
It's
that.
unbelievable. Again, like the comfortability of her in that moment, right? And it's incredible.
Yeah.
And you have that moment, and it leads to what you're speaking to there in terms of the selfies and like the level of amoral behavior. It is to a degree that very few care. And like, it sounds facetious, but I truly don't know of many other film characters that go to the level of being as immoral as Kellyanne in this film. I mean,
Yeah.
when you're talking about her being the year's most chilling villain, I don't even know if there's anything that comes close.
No, I think she is that. I think she is, which is what makes her action at the end to leave a piece of evidence behind. I still think there's a selfish motivation to it if we want to keep trying to infer what those motivations
Yeah.
could be, because I don't think she does that to absolve anyone who may be affected by these crimes.
No, I agree.
I think
Yeah.
she genuinely does that because she's probably thinking to herself, I've chewed as much as I can out of this case now. It's time to crystallize it for me. Not because
Yeah.
she thinks that she needs to disassociate from this kind of mentality. That's not it at all. It's almost like what happens if I mentioned a vampire movie in a way. Like, this kind of feels like a vampire movie. What happens when you've drained the blood from your victim, all of the blood from your victim? There's nothing left.
Yeah.
There's absolutely nothing left.
Mhm.
That's more or less what happens to Kellyanne's relationship to this case. She's drained all the blood out of it. There's nothing left for her to gain from it anymore. So she might as well just close the loop on it.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like she's doing in many ways.
Yeah, and that's very fair. And while I articulate it differently, it does
Mhm.
seem as if we're interpreting it similarly.
Yeah.
Because that's why I brought up the oblique references that are brought up earlier in the film as it relates to her modeling career and her, again, the way it's described or told to the audience through her agent, her extreme interest in things like BDSM. So when she does the stunt in the courtroom and she's being pulled away and it's in slow motion and you hear the sound design and the way she looks at Ludovic and the wave back, like it's almost as if she gets this sexual thrill out of it.
Yeah.
And you couple that with, again, as I mentioned earlier, her like getting all comfortable, like watching the video, and it's akin to that moment when you crystallize a sexual encounter and you're satisfied. Like
she got
like,
off. She
got off, and now she's like smoking her cigarette and she's ready to walk away. Like that's like her leaving that evidence behind is her.
She blew
is
her
the equivalent
load
of pulling out the cigarette. I'm done.
Yeah. Or I mean, pulling out something. I mean, it could be a cigarette. Could be
I wasn't gonna go there, but she was done.
Yeah.
She got off, and now she's done. So, and that's why, like I say, it, unselfish in terms of the potential justice that is now going to be like a part of the trial. It's not entirely selfish in that regard, but I wholeheartedly agree with you. The only reason that evidence is ever released to begin with is because she had her orgasm moment.
She had her fix. Yeah.
She had her fix.
I mean, the after effect of the justice served just comes with the territory, but that's not the motivational factor.
Yeah. It's just the cigarette. It's just, I'm done.
Is.
I'm having my cigarette now. That's all that it is.
I agree with you. Yeah. That's
which is why I can't recommend this film to anybody, really. Like,
oh no,
it's great, but
it's really ironic. These are two movies that I'm about to compare that are nothing alike whatsoever, outside of the fact that they both have Red in the title, and they are two movies I don't recommend to everyone. The other one being Red Rocket, Sean Baker's film from a few years ago. Yeah. I don't recommend that movie to many people, and yet that was in my top 3 of the year it came out, which was at 2022, I think that was. Either way, Red Rooms is going to be one of my favorite films of the year, and yet I don't recommend it to most people. All I'll say is I loved it, and if you are able to stomach what we feel like it's going for, then maybe give it a try, because I think it is a very effective film outside of just those ideas. I think as a horror/crime mystery thriller with a courtroom aspect to it, you could still take it at face value, and it is still a very thrilling film. Yeah. Like, I think it is still going to give you that particular fix, but it's so much more interested in things that I can't really recall ever seeing in a movie like this. Like that whole serial killer groupie mentality is such a unique concept for this, and I was kind of blown away by it.
No, I completely agree, and I think that's what I love about the film's thematic core, because it speaks to that in a way that other movies in the genre haven't really tackled before, or if they have, not to this extreme or in this specific way.
Agreed.
And I love that this film is willing to point a finger at the behavior to question the authenticity of it, or at the very least, that morbid curiosity. Where is that really coming from?
Yeah.
And should we draw a line? I think is such a fascinating question that this film raises. But that's what makes Clementine such a fascinating character, because she has to wrestle with that line that is drawn. And when the violence becomes real for her, she does, change her perspective. She does cross the aisle. Whereas others, the Kellyannes of the world, they're willing to get off on this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And the real world examples of that we see in the news, it is disturbing. It is very disturbing. And I love that this film is willing to demonstrate that in such an artistic and horrific way, which is why I go back to a broader talking point that you and I have certainly had here on the show many times before. The idea, the pushback against the criticism that every film has to align with your politics or morals. And look, thematically speaking, this film's politics, I do think, is something that a lot of people will agree with. But the execution in getting there is going to rub a lot of people the wrong way, because Kellyanne, while she is our protagonist here, she's the one that we follow through the entirety of this film.
Yeah.
You're not going to like a single ounce of this woman. There's
Oh,
nothing
no.
about her that's likable.
No.
And again, it's that thing of likability that modern audiences struggle with a lot of times, that sparks a lot of vapid, in my opinion, discourse around,
Agreed.
like having to like your protagonist. This quintessentially proves that you do not have to like your protagonist for the film to be great.
Oh no,
Because
and
Kellyanne is the worst.
there are times I think I prefer to watch movies where I don't like the protagonist. I like being challenged in that way. I think that's just more fascinating. But
I agree.
I'm absolutely with you. It's going to rub some people the wrong way given the diabolical execution of it all.
Yeah.
But that's something that I found so rewarding here. This really is one of the best films of the year. I'm glad we decided to pivot our original schedule and do something
Oh
like
my
this,
gosh,
and it
yeah.
really ended up being a perfect tie-in to Woman of the Hour. Like we talked about
Incredible
earlier.
tie-in. Yes.
Yeah.
Both great movies that I do hope that but I know it's not going to happen, but I do wish that awards bodies would take more seriously, because I do think horror thrillers, or the horror genre, however you want to define these two movies, but both of them quintessentially denote why the Academy needs to take them more seriously. I don't suspect both of them will have absolutely no play in the awards conversation whatsoever. And this film, even more in particular, I really love Woman of the Year. I don't know where that sits for me on a year-end list. Red Rooms is maybe my number one. Probably is the best film I've seen this year so far.
It's in my top 3 for sure. At this
It's
point
in my
now,
top
I feel
three. I agree.
in fact, it's probably in my top 2. I feel like for me right now, it's between this and Furiosa. These are my 2 favorite movies of the year thus
Great.
far.
Absolutely. And that's another genre that the Academy could take more seriously as well. That's a large spectacle movie.
I'm looking at
But-
my current top 10 of the year right now. Sorry if this is a bit of a tangent, but things could obviously change because we have so many movies that we haven't seen yet from this year that are potentially going to be huge awards players. But I cannot wait for the year, and maybe it'll be this one. Certainly, I won't fabricate my list to be this, but I would love to see this happen one day, where my top 10 of the year is all non-Oscar players, just no awards players whatsoever. Like I want that to happen. It's just an interesting thing because it doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
It's a nice balance between
It
both.
doesn't.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like the Academy over the last 10 years, we've talked about this a couple of times already, but the taste of the Academy has shifted since 2016.
Yeah.
So I do find myself aligning with them a little bit more than I did pre 2016.
I have, same here. Yeah.
Especially, like, what was that, 22 with Top Gun Maverick that year? I think I crossed over with the Academy on like 6 of my top 10. And obviously, you and I don't sit here and think about our favorite movies in the same ways that the Academy does. We have such very different criteria. It just happened to work out that way. And I think it only works out that way because of the way the Academy has shifted over the last 10 years. It's allowed for more variety than there ever used to be.
Yeah, not even just that, but you also have 2 movies that won Best Picture in 2019 and 2023, or I guess 2020 and 2024, just given when those award ceremonies were. Parasite and Oppenheimer, which were 2 common films that topped many critics' lists those years.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. So there's been a shift that I think gives credence to a critic's top 10 aligning with the Academy a little bit more, for sure.
For sure, yeah.
But with that said, there are still certain genres or subgenres that the Academy at large still needs to reconcile with. And one of them, most prominently, is horror.
Yeah.
Horror is still a type of film that most awards bodies stray away from for whatever reason. And this film, along with many others, you noted at the very beginning of this conversation that horror this year has been really great. And it has.
Yeah.
It has. It's certainly why I want to go see Smile 2, even though I haven't seen the first film yet. But generally, horror there's been an uptick this year in quality across the board.
Yeah.
And Red Rooms leads the way. And it's a film that should be considered for the Oscars. It's a film that should be considered for awards. It won't, not just because it's horror, but it's also, an international film. Technically, it's a French-Canadian film.
Yeah, unless it gets pushed heavily for the best international film category, which I don't think it will. That's really the only play that it possibly has, and I don't even think I would predict it for that either.
I wouldn't either, because again, it rides that horror psychological thriller line that sometimes the Academy embraces, but a lot of the times they don't.
Yeah.
You know, even if this was a US film and in English, I don't think this film would have a chance in hell in breaking through the Academies.
Unless it was directed by a well-known director who's already in the Oscar club in some way.
Unless they're in the club already.
Like if this were a David Fincher film, of course he would make it his own. It wouldn't be like this. But if this was a David Fincher film, I could see it getting possibly more love, or at least more of a marketing push for that love. The campaign would certainly be louder.
It would have more campaign funds behind it. But but again, I still don't know. Like, I think of Jordan Peele, for example, who's given us 3 great horror films, and they have barely sniffed the Academy. Get Out, I think, broke through a little bit. Did that get a screenplay nomination?
It got a screenplay win.
A win. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it won.
Yeah.
So, Get Out aside, and that I think breaks through because there's a heavy comedic quality to that film.
Yeah.
As well as the horror, where his other 2 films are much more visceral in nature. Is that a coincidence as to why they have been more distanced from the Academy? I don't know. Maybe. I'm just saying,
it's a shame given how good
it's
Nope
a genre
was.
that, I'm speaking to the choir. We all know the history of the Academy in this genre. All I'm saying is Red Rooms quintessentially proves that this is a type of film that, despite the history with these awards bodies, it needs to be taken more seriously. That's all I'm saying. I guess.
Red Rooms rules. Red Rooms rules. There's a tongue twister there.
Very good. It's very good. I also want to quickly note the performance by Juliette Garipi. It is a gripping, icy performance. It is remarkable how she taps into those foreboding qualities.
Yeah.
There's a lot of close-ups here, and that's another thing too about Pascal Plante. We haven't really talked about him specifically too much, although in the conversation we have invoked his direction when we're talking about the way the camera
We didn't call him
moves.
by name, but everything we talked about why we love this movie does go back to his direction.
His direction, his storytelling here, it's absolutely fantastic. And I really do love, again, the use of those red hues, the sound design, the screams, and how that is incorporated in the soundtrack during that stunt in the courtroom, which is one of the most unsettling and brilliant filmmaking tactics I've seen in God knows how long. It is absolutely remarkable.
So creepy. So
But
creepy.
in terms of the cinematography here, there are a lot of close-ups in this film on Gary Epi. And from a filmmaking perspective, I think those are radiant shots that tell us so much without having to tell us anything. Again, there is a lot of ambiguity and mystery to this film. And Gary Epi, as a performer, really does a great job of bringing those qualities out in her performance as well. It's unforgettable, the marriage between her performance and Plante's direction here. It's fantastic. Just some of the best stuff I've seen all year. So, yeah, I love it. I cannot recommend this film, but if you check it out, I hope you like it. That's all I can say.
Can't recommend it, but it might be the best film of the year.
Yeah, exactly. So with all of that
Both
said,
things can be true.
Both things are true. If you agree or disagree with us, leave a comment below. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can hit us up on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd. You can always email us in sessionfilm@gmail.com. All right. As we wind down here, just a reminder for our review earlier, we talked about it a couple of times in the conversation here. Woman of the Hour, that review is available now. Megan Carnes joined us for that conversation. It was fantastic.
Absolutely.
And then episode 607 this week, we talked about our top 5 true crime movies.
Yep.
So you'll want to go and check that out as well. We'll have a new Chasing the Gold, New Women in Session coming soon in the next day or so. So with all of that said, Brendan, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
Well, if Red Rooms doesn't sound like something you want to see, but you still want to get your Red Room fix, I'll recommend a song called Red Room that came out in 2021 by a band called Hiatus Coyote. So if you want to at least get your Red Room fix in a different way, go check that out.
There you go. We probably won't get a review of this. And unless we do some sort of catch-up episode, I don't know. But I did catch up with the film Strange Darling, which is thematically appropriate, as that is a film also about a serial killer. I don't know if you've seen Strange Darling yet or not, Brendan,
yet.
but
no,
I did not care for it.
Oh, okay.
That is a film I can't think off the cuff here of a film that is more self-centered than that one. It is smug with a capital S. It thinks so much of itself.
Sounds like I'm going to like it then.
I could not come around to it as a result. I think it is
now, because I've heard a lot of good things.
I don't mind films that, I guess it depends on the film and what it's trying to do. That was smug in a way that I just found off-putting and really disengaging. I didn't care for it at all.
Okay.
But I will say, the biggest takeaway is that Giovanni Ribisi should shoot more movies, because he is the cinematographer on that film, and it is really well shot.
That's
really,
right.
really well shot.
He has shot a few movies, hasn't he?
The last I looked up, it wasn't too many.
Oh, actually, you know what? He hasn't.
Yeah.
But he has been the cinematographer in a few music videos.
Yeah, it was like some music videos, maybe a short film. I think that was his first feature, if I'm not mistaken.
It is his first, his first feature shooting behind the scenes.
Yes,
yeah,
behind the camera, of course.
It is. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so, yeah, I like him as an actor, but he needs to consider more work behind the camera, too, because it is really well shot. I don't know if he did that as a way to learn to maybe become a director one day, the Anna Kendrick route. I don't know.
I wouldn't be surprised. I would not be surprised.
Or maybe he just wants to be a cinematographer, and all the power to him if that's what he wants to do. I don't know.
There you go. There you go.
But it's really well shot. That was easily the biggest takeaway for me.
All right. Well, if I'm not liking what I see when I go and check it out, I'll just put it on mute and bask in the imagery, I guess.
Yeah, I will say that. So as far as the serial killer themed movies I watched last week, 2 out of 3, not bad, especially when those 2 are really great. So, yeah. All right. Well, with all of that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Red Room. It rules. I got a red room. It's great.